I guess we wanted to start by talking about you have yet another new book about motorcycles, about traveling, about being on the road, about
Snow.
everything.
A lot of snow in there too.
How do you find so much time to be able to? You not only have this exhausting touring schedule, then you ride between shows. I guess first, when did you start riding between shows? Sounds like an arrangement that is perfect for you.
Yeah, it actually evolved from, I used to carry a bicycle on the tour bus in the 80s, and then days off I would get out and ride around the countryside, and show days I would ride around the city and to the show, and it became such a nice bit of independence and nature and being out with other humans outside of the cage, what touring life can absolutely be, and very alienating for a lot of people, where this got me out in the world every day. And then in the 90s I started getting interested in motorcycling and did some adventure travel around the Canadian Arctic and down to Mexico, and started to think, well, I wonder if this would work for business travel, and can see, well, if I had a bus, I could sleep on the bus and keep the bikes in the trailer and ride off on days off between shows and then show up for the next show. So we tried it that tour, and it not only worked, it was wonderful. The freedom to explore that I suddenly had.
What was the first tour to do
And
this?
Tesfreco in
Okay.
95, 96, 96, 97.
So it's a while then you've had this arrangement.
Yeah. All that every tour since then, and I've been able to do it all around Europe, South America. Even we had a South American leg a few years back, and I saw 4 days off between Brazil and Buenos Aires. And with my riding partner, said, could we do it? And once I found out it could be done, it had to be done.
Oh, yeah.
So, but it was so nerve-wracking because there was no bus and trailer or backup bike then. It was just the two of us on our bikes, and we had to get there. And in southern Brazil, we got hopelessly lost. And, no one speaks English for 100 miles. And just by the help of other people, though, as I found traveling everywhere in the world, in Africa and Mexico, when you're in trouble, people will help. And we got out of that, we made it to the show and everything, but it was so nerve-wracking because there's a huge responsibility when 10,000 people are waiting for you to show up for work, right?
Yeah.
For most people, if you're a few minutes late for work, no big deal. But in a case like that, I feel such a sense of demanding urgency to get there on a show day. And the first tour, when I started doing it, I told my riding partner, if we're less than an hour early, we're late.
Now it's such a you have a bus, you have a trailer, you have a spare bike, you have a rider to ride with you. It's a lot of setup to do this. But how important is it? Is it because is it a decompression thing after a show or before a show to just get on that bike?
The independence, the same thing that appealed to me with the bicycle. The very first time that I was able to ride a bicycle between two cities, and I think it was like a city in maybe Charlotte and Greensboro in the Carolinas. It was 100 miles apart, and 100 miles is a good distance to do in a day on a bicycle.
On a bicycle, yeah.
Yeah. But when I was left behind that day, and the bus and the rest of the band and everybody else went ahead, and I was there by myself, it was such a great feeling. And riding by myself, it was up to me. That was long before the days of cell phones, this is in the 80s.
Right.
And learning how to change a flat tire and do the repairs along the way, and that sense of independence and apartness from the machine that touring can become.
Well, it's funny, a lot of bands see that moment where they're able to fly between shows as that's the pinnacle moment to reach. And as soon as you got to that moment, you're like, no, I want to slug it out of this bus.
And I hate it that they call flyover country,
Yeah.
like the center U.S., right? There's New York and there's L.A. and the flyover country. No. I want to fly over L.A., ride across the country, and fly over New York.
Yeah. I guess there's a romantic idea of motorcycles, and there's a romantic idea of musicians. And there's always seems to be a tie-in between musicians and motorcycles. A lot of famous musicians really, I guess, enjoy motorcycles. There's something about the thrill of it. Do you see a tie-in at all? I read that you don't listen to music at all when you do ride,
No.
but yet music plays
It
in your head.
it plays inevitably in my head.
So does that act of riding then inform your music at all, or lyrics or anything?
I think it's the act of traveling, honestly.
Right.
And the motorcycle, there's a beautiful book called The Perfect Vehicle, Melinda McPherson. And that kind of describes it for me. I liked bicycling for many years and still definitely value the bicycle as an excellent mode of transport, especially in cities. But when I suddenly had the greater scope of being able to travel, and I choose the very smallest roads when I travel, and I honestly, musicians might pose with motorcycles, but I don't know anybody else that
Right.
tours that way. But I choose the very smallest roads and the very smallest towns and try to stay in the small towns, and I only go to cities to play, really.
A term I've never heard of before, shunpiping. biking.
Aha.
You in your book, I'm like, and that is the act of finding the smallest roads.
Avoiding turnpikes, and that's what it comes from, and it's an ancient word as it happens from like in the 1500s. Pikes were put across roads to protect the villages from highwaymen and night travelers. And then toll roads were invented at the same time, 500 years ago. And the pike had to be turned. So you paid your toll and they turned to the pike. So shunpikers avoided toll roads. And in modern times, you avoid interstates or motorways or autoroutes or whatever in favor of the smallest roads. And now with GPS technology, it's so wonderful because I can go to the map of whatever state I'm in or whatever province and pick the tiniest little roads and put them on the GPS. And it may not be 100% reliable because they're the smallest roads.
Right.
And we call them the mystery roads because sometimes the GPS doesn't even find that road. And the next day it may be improvising as much as we are, but that's a beautiful part of traveling too, is the improvisational aspect of it, the adaptation. To make a good traveler, you better be ready to adapt to any old thing in terms of weather or mechanical breakdown or time sensitivity or traffic, as simple as that. Traffic has changed my plans lots of times too.
Now, a lot of things you write about are the encounters between, you have the big shows, and that's what everybody thinks is, this is what everybody wants to know about, but you write a lot about the encounters between shows, about with just, I guess, getting away from that tour, getting into the everyday life, going to the diners, and
it so keeps me rooted. There's not a single day goes by that I don't have a conversation with somebody in a gas station or somebody in a diner or the motel, and just regular human-to-human interaction. And that's what I was saying about the bubble that touring can sometimes be. And when everybody looks at you a certain way and talks at you a certain way, it can be alienating and, for me, very uncomfortable. And so that's my professional milieu, fine, but I don't have to live in that bubble, and that's the greatest reward. I was saying before, it's not about the motorcycling necessarily or the scenery or the landscapes. It's about the mental state of getting away from that and thinking about what I'm traveling through and other people's lives. That's what I love being in tune with every day. And I drive past people working in the fields and think about them, and I drive past people going about their jobs and going about their lives, and kids at school, and this whole life's rich pageant, right, that's going around us all the time. When you live in a bubble, it's hard to stay in touch with that, and that's the world. Especially as a writer, you need to stay in touch with other people's lives, or the essence of what I want to do in sharing won't be possible because you're writing from some ivory tower to people whose lives you don't even have the slightest notion of, right? Absolutely. So that would be a tremendous handicap as a writer.
And I guess it gives you like a sense of anonymity as well, as opposed to private jet to guy on a bike.
Yeah, I mean, you can protect your privacy in those ways. That's a good analogy. Is that, inevitably, one of the hardest lessons we learned along the way, fortunately, we became popular fairly gradually so we could adapt to it and help each other adapt to it. But there's the first time you ever have to hire security for your dressing room door. It's like, what? For the first few years, our dressing room door was open to anyone who ever wanted to come in. Chances, happens that nobody did.
Yeah.
So that was the reality. And then suddenly when things change, and one of our live albums around that time, I wrote a little note in it, we're sorry for any friends that we're out of touch with and all that. And just remember, we didn't change, everybody else did. And that's what it seems like to you at the time. So you can put up, in the song Limelight, one can put up barriers to keep oneself intact, or you can jump right out of that. And it just occurred to me that those are the two choices, right? You can either put up barriers around you or get out of that circle, because people don't expect to see me. And there are many times I've been around someplace and somebody with a Rush t-shirt on, and will just not notice me because I'm some guy at a gas station or some guy sitting in a diner. They're not expecting to see me there. Yes. So I always love those moments when I realize that I've achieved that independence. And I just want to be that guy. I like having conversations with people on an everyday basis. I don't want them looking at me like some alien being. It
seems like you're a man of extremes. Like, you don't just drum. You drum on one of the largest kits there is. You don't just ride motorcycles. You ride 50,000 miles.
I'm extremist.
Even when you describe your appetite for reading too, it seems like a voracious appetite for reading. Like, I guess is that what got you where you are as a drummer, even?
I would expect that it all comes down to a kind of restlessness, because when people talk about boredom, for example, I can honestly say I've never been bored for a second in my life, but I've always found another way not to be. And like, if I have to go to a medical appointment, I'm like, I bring a book with me, so that waiting is not going to be a hardship. But the early days of touring, when all that dead time was hanging on me, reading, portable, useful, nurturing, all that stuff. So I think I combat. You learn to adapt to your own personality, and the extremes do come in there too. I wanted to read every book ever written. Drumming wise, my determination was more important than talent early on. I think for most things you do have to have a bit of a knack, but I had to work so hard to learn so many things, but I was relentless in terms of determination. And with traveling, when I've got a day, I'm tempted by what's the most excellent thing I can do, which might be way too far, way too long, but I'm going to go for that because it's the most excellent thing I can do. And with writing, it just seems unstinting in the same way, because I just kind of know when I've done my best on it, and maybe an editor can help make it better, and maybe somebody else could have written it better, but I have a good built-in sense of this is the best I can do.
I think you open the book when you say your drive is all you want fans to know is that care has been taken. Well, with your lyrics, with your writing, with everything, you just want to know that you've taken the utmost care in it.
It's probably an unfashionable word, care, but I really would like that to be the case in all of our music that's written and recorded, in our live performances, and certainly anything I put my name to in terms of prose writing or any other enterprise. It's going to get as much care as I can and be as good as I can possibly make it. And I kind of think that's a big element of why the band has survived always as a live entity, because that commitment and the conviction of believing in what we were doing was present at every show we ever played, whether it was a 20-minute opening slot on a 5-act show, to our first headlining and all that. Honestly, I can say among the three of us, we have never played a show that was less than all we had. Right. The hockey, leave it all on the ice. We always left it all on the stage because it's the way we're made. That was the level of professionalism, and it was unimaginable to soft pedal. Or bands that we'd opened for in the old days, and the drummer would say, "Oh yeah, I kind of take it easy up to my solo." It's like unimaginable to me. What? To play any song without 100% engagement is unimaginable. But I would hear those stories, and we were lucky to be an opening act band for a long time because we learned a lot of cautionary tales about what not to do, from being in those positions.
Another thing you write about is, I guess that which leads me to what took so long to get inducted into the Rock Hall of Fame. But you also talk about that induction and playing with this next generation of peers.
Yeah.
It must have been surreal to kind of see this next generation of people who are openly citing your influence on them.
Yeah, and even got another generation now. Taylor Hawkins, the drummer for the Foo Fighters, has become quite a good friend of mine, and he has a picture of his son now playing drums in front of a banner of me taken in 1980. One of the old Tama ads was a famous cloth banner of my red Tama drums, and that was a big inspiration to Taylor when he was a kid. So he found one of those on eBay, and now it's in his son's room. Nice. And I got a picture of him with the son holding up his drumsticks to that banner. So there were 3 generations down now. When
lists come out of the greatest drummers, you're always near the top or at the very top. And I wonder, at what point with so many people saying how influential you are, at what point did you start to believe it?
At the influence, inspiration, I think, is the rewarding thing. And when people come up and say something like that, you influenced me to play drums, I say, apologize to your parents for me. And music is certainly about sharing your enthusiasm. And the nature of Rush is we love our music, and we hope other people will like it too. There's nothing calculated more than that about it. And in the writing too, these are things that I was moved to write about and to craft carefully enough that I hope I can share with a reader. And if you do infect them with your fire. Oh, that's good. Enthusiasm. The literal meaning of enthusiasm is infected with the God. And if you can share that God of yours, that fire of yours, to light someone else's, that's a great thing too.
So when you get to that point where people are putting you on a pedestal, do you feel like as if, okay, now I can just do whatever I want and it will be highly regarded? Or does it push you more to be like, I have to be better now?
Absolutely does. It's a responsibility. I think it's a privilege to be a professional artist in the world and to be celebrated and paid for hitting things with sticks. So I take that as truly as a responsibility. And when I take on another challenge like the big band stuff, was to challenge me and also to dedicate myself to the art of drumming, to celebrating the great big band music and drumming being such a big part of that. When drum sets first came around, up until like in the last 4 or 5 years ago, I was studying with Peter Erskine again, wanting to take my drumming in another direction. When I went to visit him for the first time, I said to him, okay, look, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a butcher and you're a surgeon. And he said, you're not a butcher. I said, yeah, I'm a good butcher, but I like to get a little more surgery into my playing. And he has that kind of delicate, very highly schooled, and he's a brilliant teacher and all that. So and it fed my playing in a way I couldn't have expected. So that's part of I felt a responsibility to keep trying to refine and improve, but the reward I got from that, and the lesson path that he drew me along was one thing in the practicing that I did, but it gave me a gift that was all unexpected by me, and I'm sure by him too, of improvisation and freedom from time and all that, that is so rewarding and makes all of that so worthwhile. So it is something that I do feel a responsibility to live up to, and I don't by any means take any of that as for granted, because there are probably a million best drummers in the world, and a lot of them playing stuff that I couldn't play,
Well, and it's interesting, like when you reached a point in your career where it seems as if, all right, like you're at this top, then that's when you decide to redraw everything and go back and do lessons. And why, I guess maybe talk about that shift of going, at that point, you decide to shift your playing style.
Yeah, it becomes, it's kind of dissatisfaction that you can either get cynical about and said, this is what I got, or else you can say, well, I'd like to learn more. I'd like to make my, two good examples. In the mid-90s, I felt my drumming was getting too stiff because I'd been working with sequencers and metronomes, and I had learned to do that and control it. And when you've got a click pounding in your head, you can learn to push that and pull that and have a kind of liberation about it, because you still are in accurate time, but you get that, but it's very deliberate to do that, and it's very cerebral. And I was just getting physically stiff. And the teacher I got at that time, Freddie Gruber, was all about motion. And he just took my playing apart and put it back together with a much more fluid, natural motion. And that had a musical effect. It was a physical reinvention, but it made me play the instrument differently, approach it differently, strike each one differently, and completely changed my inner clock, as my bandmates learned when we started, making new music together. And then with Peter, it was really, I'd grown up as a rock drummer from day one. It was rock. I played along with the radio, always rock. But I love swing drumming. I love big band drumming, especially the ensemble nature of it. Of like the drummer pulls the trigger and the cannon goes off. So I wanted to learn more about that, and that was my purpose. But like I said, the result was quite other and quite greater than what I expected.
I mean, you mentioned improv, and you mentioned the word cerebral, which is how a lot of people would describe your music as well. So I wonder how much room there is for improv in the writing, because the composition of the music seems so intentional, I guess. But on the live show, is there any room for improv?
More and more over time, but again, by design.
And between the drummer and the bass is that is the relationship between feeding off each other and...
Well, there's specific choices in time. In the early days, we recorded all of us together in the studio over and over, working out, usually writing the song at the same time as arranging it and working on our parts. So by that repetition, I made super detailed drum parts that were compositional, and I considered myself a compositional drummer. And my first teacher, Freddie Gruber, tell me that you compose. I can see you compose when you're playing, and that was nice. But then I thought, well, I want to be improvisational. I didn't want to be limited by that. It's a nice thing, and it served me well through all those times. And so many of the kind of iconic Rush tracks were composed, every detail, and to play those live, I'm very happy just to reproduce those detail by detail. That's challenge enough. A song like Tom Sawyer will never be easy to play and will always be satisfying to play well. No problem, right? I don't care how many hundreds of times I should live to play that song. It will never be easy, and it will always be satisfying to do it well. But in modern times, after studying with Peter, the last two records, for example, have been completely improvised. I would go in and just I would play along with a demo of the song a few times just to see what might work, and then call the producer and said, let's start recording. And had developed the freedom of time sense through studying with Peter Erskine to be able to do that. And what a revelation. And then sometimes those improvised parts, you can take sections of it and put those all together into a master performance that was all only done once. And I think you can hear it. You can hear that I got it into a crazy drum fill, and the listener has to be going, oh, is he going to make it? And then when I get back to one, it's like, oh, so satisfying because of tension and release, right? Yeah. One of the elements of drama, especially in music, tension and release. So to introduce that into each element of my drumming, and maybe that does become a fixed part that in most cases, from Clockwork Angels and Snakes and Arrows songs, I did want to learn those because they were created that spontaneously and put together from moments that only happen once. But when there's a master performance there, I'm quite happy in most cases to learn that. But in soloing, I became almost completely improvisational in recent years.
Well, what a major shift in style for a band too, to do this one way for so long and then to be like, let's try it improv.
Well, that's how we survive, I think.
Yeah, by always growing on to move forward, I guess. You write in your book, because you're talking about the art of writing, you say and writing and planning routes and everything, you say magic exists, but often requires some planning. But you were talking about writing. I think it seems to also apply to the music even. Like you have some planning, but then there's that room for improv.
Well said, absolutely so. Yeah, all that effort of study. The early records that the three of us made together, we were experimenting. We were learning how to play our instruments. We were learning how to write songs. We were learning how to arrange, especially through, say, Farewell to King's Hemispheres. We were learning so much about arrangement and orchestration in the sense of a three-piece rock band. And all of that gathered together, and then by, say, like Moving Pictures 1980, so we've been together 6 years by that time, and then we gelled, and all of those studies, all those courses of study that we went through together with pure innocence and pure enthusiasm, suddenly they became a unified approach that Moving Pictures and from then on carried for us. And then as that time, even from that time, we continued to experiment absolutely with different kinds of songs, different kind of arrangements, orchestrations of all kinds, different producers. There's another good example. You can get comfortable working with the same producer, and some people do their whole career, but we always felt we wanted a new brains to pick and new criticisms, new enthusiasms, just new opinions even.
I heard you once say that you wished Moving Pictures was your first album.
Sure.
And there's a lot of track before Moving Pictures too.
And a lot of them I like, and a smile of indulgence now. It's nothing bitter about it.
Yeah.
It's just like in prose writing is a perfect example. I spent 20 years learning before I had to publish my first book, and that's so much better because anything I wrote before that was experimental or learning, and it was sloppy and all over the shop and not focused on the reader or the voice or anything like that I eventually learned after 20 years. So that's merely a matter of saying that by the time we learned to be a band, it was Moving Pictures. But there's lots of stuff before that I like, and even the quirky off the wall stuff I like I laugh at with a smile. You know, there's nothing bitter about it, but it's just that it would be nice to serve your apprenticeship first, as most professions allow, instead of in public.
Now you mentioned just shift in like lyrical inspiration too with the early stuff. You're always influenced heavily by books and literature. Do you have anything that you look back on sometimes and it makes you, I don't know, laugh or grimace or be like, what was I thinking when I wrote
No, honestly, with an indulgent smile sometimes, you know. I'm glad to say that I can stand behind anything that I said or wrote in those times. I could say or write it better now, and that's the part that makes me, you know, have a little embarrassed smile maybe about it, because it's the craft that I've evolved. But
how has your literary inspirations changed then from early days to now? Like, do you still look to books the same way, or now does your writing, does your travel, looking inward, does that determine your writing more now?
It's become anything more reflective about human nature, I guess, became my long-term course of study. And where early times there was playing around with fantasy and playing around with science fiction as vehicles, and even that endures. Clockwork Angels is, you know, a steampunk epic full of bizarre technology and an alternate universe and timelines and all this stuff, but it's a human story. And when Kevin Anderson and I were working out the novel version of it, we took episodes from our lives and our youth and worked them into the story as parts of it. So it's very much a human story.
Now, you mentioned the writing with Kevin of Clockwork Angels, it's interesting because it's an album and a steampunk fantasy novel. And Kevin mentioned that Grace Under Pressure inspired him to write a book. So it's going both ways.
And we had known each other for 20 years and always wanted to do some hybrid combination. He was working on a story that he thought I could do songs and lyrics to go along with, and none of that came to pass. And both of us have said we could not have created this story separately or together at that time. It took this element of maturity as artists and as human beings and as husbands and dads and all that parts of life that form you. And now we're working on the graphic novel version of that, which is another fantastic adventure into the remarkably thriving world of comics now. It's not only commercially happening as a print media, after all, but it's artistically just full of exciting young people doing amazing things, more and more women coming into it, and it's like an exciting little creative microcosm that's healthy economically too. So being part of that and creating the graphic novel version of the story has also been really rewarding.
I read an anecdote about you. When Max Webster was opening for you, you would get on your drum kit under the covers and drum along to their music.
To Gary, yeah.
Do you still do that?
Oh, you don't have an opening act?
No opening act. But how long did you do that for? Like, was it only Max Webster?
Yeah.
Oh, that's it.
But another beautiful one was when the band Primus
Yeah.
opened for us on a tour in the mid-'90s, I guess. Every single day after dinner, we got together in one of our dressing rooms or tuning rooms and had jam session. And the two guitar players were bringing like accordions and flutes, and we were playing on bicycle frames. And the rule was you were supposed to play an instrument that was not yours.
Right.
So the other guys would be playing drums, and it was just an ad hoc thing that became a ritual, like every single day. So those kind of relations did exist, but then since that time we haven't had opening acts. So.